Using innate photographic reflexes, Tony Masters is able to replicate any action he witnesses, no matter the complexity. Using these skills, combined with an arsenal of deadly facsimile weapons, he operates as a henchman, trainer, and mercenary for hire, known throughout the underworld as Taskmaster. Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Number One Comics Podcast. This is the only podcast dedicated to first issues. I'm your host, Jonah, and with me again is Bill.
How's it going?
Bill, how are you doing today?
Not too bad.
Excellent. Thanks again for joining me for another set of fantastic reads.
Absolutely.
We'll see if they're fantastic. That remains to be seen. But we're starting off strong, I think, with this first issue that we're going to talk about
Definitely.
Today and over the course of the next few weeks. As you can see, and probably had garnered from the intro there, we're talking about Taskmaster #1. This is a Marvel Comics publication. It was published June of 2020, so it's a relatively recent issue. Cover price on this is $3.99. Again, that's sort of become par for the course for comic pricing. $4.99 is very typical. $3.99 is still out there. Writer on this is Jed MacKay, and the artist was Alessandro Vitti. Are you familiar with any of their other work? I know you don't read a ton of comics these days.
I'm not. They were totally new to me.
Yeah, so Jed MacKay I'm familiar with just over his work on Moon Knight, Avengers. He's currently writing the new X-Men series. He's overall, I think, a really, really well-rounded, a very good writer. And I think that translates well here as we'll talk about.
Definitely.
So for those of you joining us who may not be familiar with our titular character, Taskmaster, he first appeared as a villain back in Avengers 195, back in 1980, May of 1980, to be precise. His real name is Tony Masters. And like I'd indicated in the intro, he does have the ability of instantly replicating the physical movement of any peak-level superhuman or let me rephrase that, peak-level human, not necessarily superhuman, because he in and of himself has no superhuman strength, endurance, stamina, etc.
Right.
So he can't do things like fly or shoot optic blasts, that sort of thing. He can't lift a building over his head, but it does make him an expert at hand-to-hand combat. He's an expert swordsman. He's an expert marksman. Once he's mastered his opponent's moves, which he can do just by watching them, he can then predict their moves in the next attack. I think the only person he struggled with that was when he fought Deadpool one time.
Right, and if I remember right, it was because Deadpool just plain doesn't care if he gets hurt because he can heal.
Yeah, he's hard to predict because he's so unpredictable, I guess would be the word for that.
Right.
He could also manipulate his vocal cords to mimic voices of others, and he can control his breathing and heart rate, which allows him to play dead, and he can survive without oxygen for extended periods of time. So overall, he's, again, a bad guy, but I think that's what makes characters like Taskmaster so interesting.
Definitely.
And why I've always been a fan of, I don't even think anti-hero is the right word, because he is a bad guy. Mm-hmm. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Let's dive into the issue itself and give everyone out there a real brief synopsis. Spoilers are ahead. So here we go. We open up with... let me rephrase this. We open up in the apartment of Maria Hill. Now, as a real quick aside, Maria Hill was a high-level S.H.I.E.L.D. officer. Mm-hmm. If you are not familiar with the comics, but you know the Marvel Universe movies, she's been a relatively recurring character in the movies, as sort of an aide or second, right hand to Nick Fury. So we open up in her apartment. The place is completely trashed. Blood is splattered across the walls, and there's a bloody shield lodged in the side of the wall. We then focus on a bloody dead hand on the floor. Now, from there, we quickly cut to the 4th annual Magia Celebrity Doubles Charity Golf Tournament. This is a golf tournament run by mobsters for a charity. This is where we meet up with Taskmaster. He's paired with a goon named Calhoun, and they are paired up against Bullseye and another. Calhoun is berating Taskmaster's choice of attire. Taskmaster quips that his outfit won Best Skull Costume 3 years running, even beating out the Red Skull, which is impressive because the Red Skull's skull costume is also good. Bullseye and his partner, they're not vibing, and Taskmaster starts giving him some shit, causing Bullseye to lash out. Taskmaster warns that he's seen Daredevil fight and asks if Bullseye wants to find out if Taskmaster can beat his ass just like Daredevil did. So I really like the back and forth between those two in those first couple of pages.
Love it.
Now, before things can escalate between the two, Calhoun is shot right in the head. The 3 remaining men scatter as bullets rain down. Taskmaster spots the shooter. He spots the shooter's location and is able to whack a golf ball right into the scope of the shooter's gun. All that Nicholas Woods and Palmer file footage that he'd been watching clearly paid off there. Taskmaster questions who the shooter's after, whether it's him or Bullseye. As the pair split up, a stream of gunfire follows Taskmaster answering his question. He hops into a golf cart to escape while emulating Robbie Reyes, the Ghost Rider, not the motorcycle riding Ghost Rider, but the hot rod muscle car riding Ghost Rider. So he's driving like, hell on wheels. He gets a phone call while he's driving the golf cart, and our mystery caller is clearly observing him, and his would-be assassin is in hot pursuit on a dirt bike at this point. The mystery caller is offering the Taskmaster aid in escaping. Taskmaster exits the golf course and onto a archery range where he intends to rearm himself. He's able to nab a bow and an arrow-filled quiver from some frightened bystanders. Impersonating the skills of the Avenger Hawkeye, Taskmaster fires a trio of arrows at his pursuer. The would-be assassin ditches the bike, essentially using it as a shield, as all 3 arrows strike the bike. The shooter continues their assault on Taskmaster, eventually killing the golf cart. So Taskmaster has to ditch that and flee through the woods on foot. He leaps a fence. Taskmaster meets his mystery caller, and it is none other than Nick Fury. Now, a point of clarification again, if you're especially an old comic book reader, this is Nick Fury Jr., and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Fury drives Taskmaster away. Taskmaster wants to know what's going on, and he's told that Maria Hill has been murdered. Taskmaster is relatively flippant about it until he learns that he's the one that's been framed for the murder. And his shield was found at the scene. That's the shield that we saw lodged in the wall in that very opening pages. Fury knows that it wasn't him the moment that he agreed to get in the car. Fury states that Maria taught him everything, every dirty trick, every underhanded move that he's ever known. It's acknowledged that Maria had a lot of enemies, but with Taskmaster framed, there's going to be people coming after him. Taskmaster thinks he'll just lay low for a while until it blows over. But he's told that that's not going to happen, as there is no place on Earth that he can run to where the Black Widow won't come for him. And we see that she's the one that's actually was the would-be assassin that was chasing him through the golf course. He screams out in his head, but plays it cool with a simple, the Black Widow? All right. He then acknowledges to Nick that he's going to die and wants to know why Nick would be willing to help him. Nick states that he may have a use for him. A little bit later, Fury and Taskmaster arrive at some sort of safe house in Connecticut. Taskmaster slept the majority of the way, snoring. After a few jabs back and forth, they get down to business. Fury reveals that while Hill was retired from S.H.I.E.L.D., she'd been working on a personal project that Nick can't make heads or tails of, a project called Rubicon Trigger, a system or a system based on some old Hammer mainframe. Now, Hammer was the organization that replaced S.H.I.E.L.D. during the Darker Reign era of Marvel Comics, and that was under the leadership of Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin. And this is when Norman Osborn was acting as the Iron Patriot, just as a quick aside for everybody. Anyway, Fury can't crack the biometric encryption because it's locked to the kinesthetic signature of the gait and body language of not just one, but 3 different people. These 3 people need to be in the same room at the same time, inputting within 30 seconds of each other in order for it to be unlocked. This is a task that's impossible to replicate unless, of course, you're the Taskmaster. Taskmaster is up to the task, but he would need to observe each of the 3 personally and up close. It's not something that he can necessarily do through video of them. This is something that Nick was afraid of because the 3 people is Phil Coulson, who's the director of Squadron Supreme of America Project, Okoge, who's the director of Agents of Wakanda, and Ami Han, who's the director of South Korea's NIS Tiger Division. All 3 of these people are top spies in the world, and they're all surrounded by some of the most dangerous people to ever exist. And that's where we end it. That's where it's to be concluded. Taskmaster sounds like he's up for the task. No pun intended. But that's really the first issue. Let's give our thoughts.
Well, first of all, I have to say that Taskmaster is one of my all-time favorite villains in the Marvel universe. They kind of did him dirty in the MCU.
100%. That is not
Taskmaster to me.
That's not our Taskmaster. I don't think that's even... I mean, it is, sure, a person called Taskmaster.
Right.
Let's kill them off and move on, please.
I do like how you'd kind of mentioned the him, emulating certain people throughout this comic. Like there's kind of a flash of him emulating Ghost Rider when he's on the golf cart. He was able to basically become a golf pro by watching PGA Tour golf masters. That's the thing I've always loved about Taskmaster. He's somebody who can go toe-to-toe with the Avengers.
Yeah.
And I love seeing him in this comic, especially the dialogue and everything like that is just immaculate as far as I'm concerned.
He's always been one of my favorites as well. His costume, I think, is probably one of the best costumes.
Oh, definitely.
Ever designed, because it's outlandish, it's wild, and I think it would translate really well on screen because I think it's just so ridiculously cool looking, especially with the skull mask, which when I was much younger, I thought that was his actual face. I never realized that was just a mask. Well, essentially.
So that's my thing. You can see him opening his mouth in a few panels here. So is it like a face paint thing? Is it a mask that's just like hinged? Like what's our thoughts on this? You're
questioning comic physics.
Yeah, I know. And it's kind of the same to me. It's the same thing as like Spider-Man when he like when his eyes squint.
Remember for the Halloween episode when I dressed like Hellboy and I was unrecognizable as anything other than Hellboy? It's like that. It's just that good of a makeup job. Nice. I couldn't tell you how the mask actually works. Like I said, when I was younger, I thought that was his actual face, like Skeletor.
Right.
So that's kind of was my take on it. His ability's cool. His personality is always something that I can relate to, not because I'm a mercenary. Like clearly that's not what we have in common.
Sure he isn't.
But he's got this kind of sardonic wit that I appreciate.
Yeah.
He's got this knack of coming off very flippant and aloof, which was actually used by one of my bosses one time to describe me in an annual review, which I was like, oh, cool, thanks. I'm like, no, it's not a compliment.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, all right, I'll work on it. So again, I can relate to the character. We open with that bloody crime scene, and while we're told that Maria Hill's dead, we really only see the forearm and a hand. So I'm not 100% buying at this point in time.
Well,
that she's dead.
Nobody's ever is anybody ever really dead in Marvel Comics?
Now, when we meet up with the Taskmaster, he is antagonizing Bullseye, as I'd mentioned, which is very funny to me. I love how he uses the golf cart as the escape vehicle, like what you talked about. And he's using that kind of Ghost Rider-esque driving ability. Plus, I found it funny that in the midst of fleeing for his life that he still answers the phone as it could be a potential client.
Right.
He even talks to him like it's a potential customer. We also get a glimpse of his abilities with the bow and arrow, which is cool because, again, if you're somebody who's not familiar with Taskmaster necessarily, or if this is, the first time you're picking up this character, you kind of learn a lot about him over the course, through the dialogue, through just seeing his abilities. It doesn't even tell you what his abilities are until the very end of the comic when you get to the title page. The Nick Fury in this, again, if you're not somebody who's super up on the changes that had happened over the years, why is Nick Fury no longer David Hasselhoff? Which, did you know they changed his name to just Hoff?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, it's less hassle. But why your Nick Fury now looks like, Samuel L. Jackson is, like I said, this is Nick Fury Jr. He appeared back in 2012, replacing his father, the original Nick Fury. This change was largely based on Samuel L. Jackson playing the character in the Marvel movies. And that was all spawned by the Ultimate Universe. So it was the Ultimate Universe that... Well, I'm sure we'll talk more about that as we go through episodes, but the Nick Fury in that universe, Samuel L. Jackson was like the character model used for drawing that particular character. So anyway, the back and forth between he and Fury, I think, is really good as well. It's snappy, but both sound in character. It's very easy, probably just with how he looks, but to put like Nick Fury's voice on the page, and that always helps me when I'm reading a character.
While I was reading it, I was hearing Samuel L. Jackson in my head.
100%. Yeah. So everything we need to know about the story, the problem, the players, etc., it's all laid out in the dialogue. The writing, from Jed MacKay is great as usual, and Vidi's art is absolutely fantastic. One thing, going back to the Skull Mask, one thing I do love about it is how well he can emote in it, where like he actually can look worried or concerned or happy. Like, I think that's just very funny. So I guess my take on this issue as a number one issue, it's fantastic. It's a great setup to a miniseries.
Absolutely.
It's got some cool action sequences. It's got a cool mystery. It's got great humor throughout. If there was one knock I would give it, it's just that it was just that a miniseries. Like, I would love a Taskmaster ongoing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as far as the rest of the story, or really the rest of Taskmaster's stories, if we kind of take a look at him as a whole, aside from his appearances as an Avengers villain, or as an antagonist to others like Moon Knight, The Bottom. Did you ever read Moon Knight, The Bottom?
I didn't.
No, it was kind of the mid 2000s series by a novelist, Charlie Houston, who wrote Moon Knight. The first story arc was called The Bottom, and Taskmaster plays a role in that. And I think it's a killer Moon Knight story, especially if you don't know who Moon Knight is. It's a really cool one to get started with. So I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point too. And that is the story that brought Moon Knight back from like obscurity. Since then, Moon Knight has had a mini series or a running title almost consecutively every year. Like, there's been very few years, I think, if any, where there's been a break in not having a Moon Knight title out. But Taskmaster himself, he did have a limited series back in 2002, which that ran for 4 issues. He had a supporting role in Agent X around that same time, which I've never read any Agent X.
I haven't either.
I know of it. I'm familiar with the characters, but I've never actually read the story itself. And then following the superhero Civil War back in the mid-2000s, he was also had a role in the Avengers initiative, training a lot of the new Avengers recruits that they were bringing, which was very cool. In 2010, he had a second 4-issue limited series. And then in 2011, he had his first solo graphic novel called Taskmaster Unthinkable. And I've not read either of those yet, but we'll probably have to track those down. During the Marvel Now rebranding, that was an initiative that Marvel had, he joined the Secret Avengers. It's funny because I used the whole Marvel Now thing as my sort of getting out of collecting comics, like my excuse to stop collecting comics.
Right.
I was like, oh, they're doing all this rebranding. I did the same thing with DC's New 52, where I'm like, and I'm out.
Right.
So I didn't really read any of the Marvel. I have or own still a bunch of it and bought a bunch of it. I just have never gone back and read it yet. There is a female version of this character, as we'd mentioned, in the 2021 Black Widow movie. But, she sucked in comparison to this guy. If I'm being my complete true self. I think, it was a lack of personality. The costume didn't look nearly as good. She was just lame in comparison.
Right.
That character is slated to be part of the upcoming Thunderbolts movie, which is a shame because I'd much rather see this version of it introduced in something like that.
Absolutely.
So much like what Marvel's done with characters like Venom back in the 90s and Deadpool, it's really easy, and I think it's really cool and good to give characters like Taskmaster their own ongoing series. I think it'd be so easy to do. We've got these limited series that have been great, but if you put him in an ongoing under the stewardship of somebody like McKay, he's a villain that can be treated sympathetically, especially when he's going up against worse villains, is kind of the key to make your villain a little bit less villainous.
Right.
As a bad guy that gets hired by bad guys to do bad things, he is a villain. He's not an anti-hero, like I said, but we've seen him hired to do some good things as well, like train a new generation of Avengers that I'd mentioned. As a mercenary, there's a lot of cool things I think you can do with the character, just depending on who's hired him and for what reasons. So there's a lot of layers to a guy like this, which I think makes him really appealing as a character. And I'd love to see that more explored in the ongoing. So Marvel,
Definitely.
If you're watching this, give us more Taskmaster, please.
Absolutely.
Anything else that you want to say about the book, the character, that we haven't already hit on?
I'll just echo your point. I'd love to see an ongoing series. I'd love to see a faithful adaptation of Taskmaster on the big screen, even in his own solo project. That would be cool. I do. What I would like to see from a ongoing series is how he uses other people's abilities to help him out of certain situations. Like if there's something that requires a level of agility, he can, mimic Daredevil or Spider-Man, something like that. The sky's the limit with a guy like Taskmaster.
100%. So. Yeah, agreed. I think that for as much Taskmaster as we've gotten over the years, I think there's still a lot of untapped potential there.
Very much
that I would love to see Marvel dive a little bit deeper into at some point in the near future. So, like I said, Marvel, keep the Taskmaster coming. So I'm going to ask you, Bill, again, you read this issue. Would you pick up the rest of this particular miniseries?
Absolutely,
and finish out the mystery? Okay.
Absolutely, I would.
All right.
And it even makes me want to go out and collect the other series you mentioned, the graphic novel, stuff like that. The same.
Yeah, I want all the Taskmaster appearances. I want the graphic novel. I want the first miniseries that I don't recall ever reading. I want to go back and check out Agent X, is that what I said it was? Again, I haven't read it, but I would even go back and see that just because I want to get more Taskmaster. So.
Well, and another thing that I was also pleasantly surprised by was when I was playing the Marvel Spider-Man video game for PlayStation 4. There's side missions where you're just randomly captured by Taskmaster and you have to fight him.
That's cool.
Yeah. And the entire time he's like, I've taken on the Avengers, I can take on you, and all this other stuff. And you fight him in the Avengers video game as well, which we won't discuss because that game sucks. But, I'd even like to see like a kind of like a Batman Arkham kind of game where you play as Taskmaster.
That'd be cool, especially since, let's say you've got kind of a certain level of ability starting out, right? But then as you fight certain characters and you can mimic their moves, like your skill set starts to increase, you can start to move like them. I think that's an awesome idea.
Yeah. Or I mean, you could even do it like Mega Man, where like you had to get Iceman's powers to fight Fireman. I'm paraphrasing here, but
no, that's
you could do something kind of like that. I mean, I know he doesn't have any powers like you said, but certain skill sets. Of course, if he was going up against Bullseye, who's the best guy to emulate for that is probably Daredevil.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, that's an awesome idea. All right, make us a video game too while you're at it, Marvel. Thank you. Well, that's all we've got for this particular episode. Thanks again for joining us. Feel free to hit that like button, subscribe. We're part of the Field of Geeks network. Check us out on Facebook at the Number One Comics Podcast, and feel free to send us an email as well at the Number One Comic Podcast at gmail.com. Thoughts, comments, feedback, if there's any issues that you want to see as well, let us know. Special thanks to everyone at the Field of Geeks Network for helping make this happen. Special thanks to Raven X for the theme song, and we really appreciate it. So thanks, everybody. We'll catch you next time.
See ya.